Well, first of all, thanks everybody for watching. What we're doing right now is we're going to do a little bit of a moderated conversation. We have a couple of experts in the room. We have Will Tucker, we have Mark Samber. My name is John Morgan. I'm the Director of Analytics for MHP Team SI, family of companies, and Mark is joining us. Mark is an expert in analytics and search engine optimization. He has years and years of experience on Google Analytics and is very knowledgeable on other platforms, analytics platforms, and measurement from web application tracking, website tracking, and engagement reporting. And Will Tucker is also with us, and Will is also an analytics expert. I think his expertise is really digging into analytics and deriving some insights from the data and digging around. And also he's a pro at setting up Google Tag Manager. He's very familiar with Universal Analytics. He has done some setup, like pretty detailed setup on Google Analytics 4. He's also helped us on some third-party analytics tracking and setup. And so he's an expert. I think between the three of us, we're probably coming up on, safe to say, a few decades of experience in analytics. Maybe that's a little ambitious, but I think it's safe to say that we're well-versed in our analytics, especially when it comes to Google Analytics. And so that's why we're excited to get together today and talk about a comparison between two analytics platforms. And the reason why this is important is because Google recently announced that their Google Analytics Universal product is going to be sunsetting next year, July 1st of 2023. And so a lot of people have been talking about this. A lot of people have been looking at their analytics setup, what is going to change. A lot of people have been looking at Google Analytics 4 to start to transition to that, which I think we've talked about quite a bit recently, how important it is to start setting that up if you haven't already, so you can do some comparisons and see what is different comparing GA4 to the Universal Analytics model. We've also looked at other third-party platforms that offer different solutions, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is another third-party platform and how it compares to GA4. It's called Matomo, and it is historically, I think it was called Pywick, if I'm not mistaken. Y'all set me straight on if I'm mistaken on that. I think they are called Motomo now, and they are an open source solution. There are paid versions of it. There are free versions of it. We're going to dig into that a little bit. And we're going to see how it compares, how it stacks up to Google Analytics 4 in case people are looking for alternatives. And so we're really hoping to dive in and cover some pros and cons, what some strengths are on both sides, what some weaknesses are on both sides, and really just have an open conversation about both of those. And we'll also talk a little bit about Universal Analytics and how it compares to that in case you're curious. So that'll be another thing to throw in the mix there. That's why this is important. So y'all stay tuned. If you have any questions that stem from anything that we talk about or any suggestions about other topics we may want to have a moderated conversation about, definitely let us know. Hoping to do more of these in the future. I think it's great to have experts come together, really have a conversation, just be open-minded about options, pros and cons, and how best we can serve our clients. So let's jump in. And the first thing that I want to talk about is data structure. And this sounds kind of nerdy right off the bat, but I think it's really important because it's really at the core of the analytics solutions, right? So what we're talking about when we talk about data structure is, how is the data collected? How is it formatted in a way that makes sense to us? And so Universal Analytics, historically, there was a structure of, you have sessions, you have users, a user ID that persists across multiple sessions. A session, has a set beginning and end point that was defined by Universal Analytics in a very specific way. There were hits that are defined in a very specific manner, events that are defined in a very specific manner. And so each platform is going to have a little bit of difference in that. And so there's actually a big difference between Universal Analytics and Google Analytics 4. And we also want to talk about Matomo with regard to the data structure that they have. So I'm going to toss it over to Will first, and I'm going to ask about the Google Analytics 4 data structure. How do they have things, formatted where it makes sense? Does it make more sense than it did in Universal Analytics, do you think? Is it better? Is it worse? Is it confusing? So let's start there, and then maybe we'll talk to Mark a little bit about how Matomo handles their data structure. So Will, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, GA4's new data structure, definitely for people who are used to Universal Analytics, it's going to be unfamiliar, but I would say it is more simplified. So rather than having hits collected as page views, events, and having the session level, GA4 has, it just collects all hits as events. So instead of event category, action, and label in GA4, you just have event name and the ability to pass custom parameters with each event. And so that really gives you the option to have a really well customized measurement plan. And to me, once you get used to that new data structure, once you kind of jump over that hurdle, it opens up a lot of possibilities. So it is definitely exciting for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And based on what I've read, based on my experience, I really like the event-based model. It just clicks, right? I mean, that's what people are doing, whether you're on a mobile application or a website. You have different events that are happening, and sometimes those events could be classified as a page view or a screen view in the case of a web application. And there are still sessions. We still have sessions, we still have users. But a lot of the things that are those engagements are going to be broken down into different types of events. And some of those events are captured by default. You don't have to do any custom setup, but you can certainly go the extra mile and do custom events and set those up to make sure you have all your bases covered, which is really important. So I like that model. I think it's a great direction to head in. Excuse me. It is a big difference, though, so people need to be prepared for that. And of course, we want to talk about Matomo and how that compares to GA4's model, where its data structure fits in. Is it more comparable to Universal Analytics, Mark, or does it more line up to GA4? Do you think? Where does it fit in?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think it's kind of a hybrid. It uses a simplified approach to tracking hits, similar to the way GA4 does, but it's very similar to Universal Analytics in how it handles events, because they're basically mapping the way Google's event, UA event schema works, which is event category, action, label, and values. So I would say it's kind of in the middle. You're going to get a lot of the same type of measurement that you would get in Universal Analytics. So you'll still see page views and sessions and visits, but they do tally these up into hits, or they call them actions, actually. But you're also going to get the event categories that are present in Universal Analytics. And in fact, it doesn't really support GA4 data structures. So I would say it's probably more like Universal Analytics than it is GA4, but in some ways it's simplified like GA4 was trying to do.
That makes sense. And it sounds like maybe the best of both worlds. It's a familiar environment, but you also get the rich event collection. You're able to get the detail that's needed. So that's good to hear. I think a lot of people will appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So really, they're both pretty strong in this. I think GA4 has everything that you would want essentially available. It may need some custom setup, but I think that's safe to say for both of them. Custom setups for really custom websites is not uncommon. So nothing out of the ordinary there. Another thing that is a big difference between the two of these platforms, and something that I think it's safe to say, when GA4 first launched, a lot of people were maybe taken aback or surprised by the minimalistic data visualization, just the dashboard, the layout of things when you log in. It's quite a big jump from the very detailed navigation on the left-hand side. I think they really boiled it down to just the critical things. There are still plenty of ways to get to important information, obviously, within the navigation and the menus within the tables and charts. But it's a big difference going from UA to GA4. So I know a lot of people may struggle when they first check out that GA4 dashboard. It's pretty minimalist. It's pretty sparse, some would say. Do you feel limited in that dashboard? Do you feel like there are other ways to dive into the data, or are we just stuck with the minimalist dashboard that's available there? Are there ways to make the most of it?
Yeah, well, the built-in reports in GA4 are definitely scaled down compared to Universal Analytics, which can be shocking. It was definitely shocking to me when I first started working in GA4. But GA4 offers a new Explorer tool, which is full of resources for quick and powerful analysis. It's actually more like a sandbox environment, which requires thoughtful configuration, but in the long run, it leads to more flexibility and customization. You can split up the data by every dimension, every metric, every segment. You can build custom segments within the Explorer tool. You can control the date ranges, and you have multiple options for analyses like funnel exploration, path exploration, cohort analysis, and all kinds of visualizations to come with it.
It sounds pretty powerful. Sounds like a lot of the bases are covered there. It just may be a bit of a learning curve, or may take a little while to get used to it. Some similar buttons or different naming conventions. You just have to figure out where to click, maybe. And so that's part of the fun when a new launch comes around. You just have to find your way around and get comfortable with it. But ultimately, it sounds like it can still be plenty powerful. So that's good to hear. Mark, I'm curious about your take on Matomo's visualization and dashboard, the way that they present data. How does it compare to GA4? Do you feel at home there? Is there a learning curve? Is it steep? How are most people, from just your average user to a power user, going to respond to Matomo's dashboard?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I feel like the Matomo interface is a lot more robust than the GA4 interface is. It's also very intuitive. So it's going to be familiar to people who have spent time in the traditional Google Analytics. There's a left navigation bar that has, the typical section headings like behavior and acquisition and things like that. There's a lot more there because there are quite a few additional features in the Matomo platform. But it's not just that the navigation is easy. I think the interface itself and the way you interact with the different widgets that are representing, your data, either in tabular form or as a time series or just a scorecard type metric, are a lot easier. There are these little icons that usually accompany most of the visual elements in the interface that allow you to explore that data in much more detailed way. So I think the interface itself is really easy to use. I've been using Google Analytics for over a decade, just a couple of years after it launched. And I've been using Matomo for less than a year. And I feel as comfortable in the Matomo interface, if not more comfortable in the native Matomo interface than I do in the Google Analytics 3 or Universal Analytics interface. And I've got over a decade of experience in that. So that should tell you something about sort of the learning curve. I think it's a lot less steep, and it's it's just very intuitive and easy to use. So, I think it's a really strong feature in the platform.
I know a lot of people will be comforted to hear that it's not so much of a challenge to grasp or get used to, get accustomed to where to look for things. It may be a familiar environment, and certainly still very capable in terms of finding the information that you need. So I think a lot of people will be relieved to hear that. That's a great comparison. I think they both have a lot of options to dig through, and people need to be mindful of, well, this is a big difference maker here, and what's going to suit my needs really for daily driving or for big insights and investigations. So something to keep in mind. And the other thing that's important when it comes to data visualization is a lot of people want to use a third-party tool. So for example, I know the three of us, we like to use Google Data Studio quite a bit and pull data in from other platforms and sift through it, build reports. So Mark, really quickly, how would somebody pull in Matomo's data into a third-party visualization tool? Is it easy, or is there a lot of flexibility there, or what's kind of the process look like?
Yeah, no, another really good question. And I mean, obviously, as I mentioned, the native reporting interface in Matomo is pretty robust, but there are times when you're going to need to go outside of the platform. And, there are a couple of ways to do that with Matomo data. There is a connector for Data Studio. You mentioned Data Studio. Obviously, it's a great visualization engine. And there is a third-party plugin, or not plugin, there's a third-party connector that allows you to pull Matomo data into Data Studio. Honestly, it's not that robust. I've played around with it. I don't really recommend it. So you really you're forced into some different processes to pull your data out of Matomo. There are some ways of automating that. They actually have some really robust automated report, email report settings, and you can wire that up to some automated processes to pull those reports into a Data Studio dashboard. But it's not, it's certainly not as integrated as the Google ecosystem, but it's workable. And I think it's something that, if you are okay with, sort of daily updates to your data, you have a very, very viable and easy to use solution. If you need real-time data access, like what you get out of, the Google ecosystem with Google Data Studio linking up to the various, Google Analytics and such, you're forced with Matomo into a situation where you would need access to the raw SQL, and that it's certainly possible. And obviously with us, we can give clients access to that, or we can do that for them. But if you're using Matomo's hosted product, you're not going to get that. It does take a little bit more to get the same level of functionality in visualizing your data in a third-party tool, whether it's Tableau or Data Studio or Looker or anything else. So
that's a great overview, and it sounds like there are some things that need to be considered. There are definitely a lot of options, but it needs to be thought through. It needs to be set up in a manner so that you can make sure that if you do use a third-party data visualization or analysis program, then you're not going to have much trouble. There's going to be as little friction as possible in getting that data pipeline established. You can pull it at the frequency that's needed, and everything will be as smooth as it can be. So definitely possible, just needs to be thought through.
Right.
So that's important, obviously, to think through that. And we did touch on the ease of connecting just within the Google sphere, the Google universe of products, and GA4 I don't think is any exception there. Will, what has your experience been, and what do you think about the GA4 connection process? Are there any hiccups that you've experienced, or is it as easy as it used to be, or anything to look out for there?
Yeah, I would say to connect something, or to connect GA4 to a tool like Google Data Studio. Obviously, those two integrate directly still. It's pretty easy to connect them. I'd say the one hiccup you might run into is a lot of times it's easier to configure your events within GA4 rather than try to pull them out of Google Data Studio. So instead of doing your filtering within Google Data Studio, do your filtering in the configure tool in GA4 and then pull that data into Google Data Studio. That's always going to be a little bit easier for you.
That's a great pro tip. That makes sense. And always good to hear that it's not much of a pain point to get your data connected to your visualization platform. So always good to hear that. Let's move to historic data and data retention policies and a little bit of that fun. So I know that personally, one of my favorite things about Universal Analytics was that you had a lot of historic data there. I mean, depending on how long you started or when you started collecting your data, obviously, you could have years of data there, and that is very valuable to a lot of businesses. It's valuable to a lot of websites to have that at your fingertips. You can do a lot of analysis on that. Some users may not need that, but better to have it and not need it, right? So let's talk about how that differs from Universal Analytics into GA4. So what is the GA4 historic data policy, if you will? If Universal Analytics data is going away next year, Google has said it'll be about 6 months after July the 1st, 2023. The historic data in Universal Analytics it's disappearing. We won't have it available in the dashboard anymore. What does GA4 offer, or is there any way to hold on to that, Will?
Yeah, so GA4 by default only stores 2 months of your data. After 2 months, that data gets deleted and it's gone. In the data retention settings, you can change that to 14 months. So you can still get over a year's worth of data in there. But if you want to keep anything longer than 14 months, you're going to have to connect your GA4 property to Google BigQuery. That, depending on your resources, that could be expensive. It may require some, expertise, help from an expert to get that set up. But in terms of GA4, that's one of the only ways to keep your historic data. So, if you have a lot of data sitting in your Universal Analytics account and you want to hang on to it, my first suggestion would be to set up GA4 as soon as possible, and then change that data retention setting from 2 months to 14 months. And then if you can, go ahead and set up your Universal Analytics property to Google BigQuery, get all that data backed up, or if you can't do that, store it in some spreadsheets. But either way, you have some options to back up that data, and then you have some options to maintain data in Google Analytics 4 as well. But Google BigQuery is going to be your biggest source for keeping that data around for longer than a year.
That makes sense. So if you want to keep all your data from Universal Analytics within the Google sphere of products, you've got options there. But it is important to, again, do some due diligence, plan that, make sure to consult somebody that knows what they're doing in terms of data storage, and that you get everything that you need if you need to go back and do analysis on that historical data. So that's big. Glad to hear there's some options there, and great pro tip on changing the data retention setting in GA4. I think that's important as well. Mark, what about Matomo? How does Matomo feed into this? Do they have data retention policies? Do they offer any assistance when it comes to the data that we already have within Universal Analytics?
Yeah, so that's again good questions that I'm really kind of excited that this is one area that Matomo just kind of puts Google to shame, quite frankly, and that is from a data retention policy standpoint, you can set it from 1 day to however long you want it to be. So you're not locked into 2 months or 14 months and that's it. You want to retain that data forever, you can retain that data forever. You want to retain it for, 756 days, you can set that number, whatever you want, whatever your heart's content. So, yeah, I don't think there's any comparison. If you need flexibility in how long you want to retain your data, Matomo, you can't beat it. So, in terms of, historical data that you may, if you've been using, Google Analytics for the last, 10 years, 7 years, since they launched it in 2007, Google really, as Will was just saying, I mean, it doesn't really give you a very good option. I mean, yes, you can put it into BigQuery, but that's going to cost you money. And anything you're going to do there is going to cost you money. And if you're storing it in spreadsheets, well, that's not really very accessible or easy to access. So Matomo actually has a really simple GA import tool that leverages the Google Analytics data API to pull your historical data. It's as easy as just providing the account ID, the property ID, and the view ID of the Google data set that you want. And the really cool thing about it actually is that if you've got data that maybe Google collects, but Matomo doesn't. So for example, the full Core Web Vitals suite or demographic data like age and gender, which Matomo does not have those dimensions by default. You can actually set those up as custom dimensions in your import, and you can pull those in. So you have the complete data set, if you want, from your GA3 Universal Analytics historical data, and you can zip that right into Matomo, and you now have the same type of access as you had as if you were still using Google Analytics. So to me, that's a huge value add for any business that's been running their web stats on Google Analytics and is concerned about Google not providing a pathway to continue to use that historical data. There is a solution, and it's about as easy as it gets. So that excites me a lot, actually.
Well, that's huge. That's definitely a lot of really valuable information. I do think, obviously, historical data is going to be a big talking point. A lot of people need to think through what's going to happen to my universal analytics data. Do I need it? How much do I need? Where will it go? Can I set this up? Do I need to talk to somebody that is an expert in moving data around and storing data? So a lot of things to think through there. So I appreciate y'all both sharing a lot of information there. Very useful stuff. Now I think it's time to dig into something that's very important, and that is pricing. And a lot of people are familiar and used to Universal Analytics as a free product. It's been a great tool as a free product. Is Google Analytics 4 going to be free? Will, is there a cost associated with that? Are there any things to keep in mind that are going to jump out at you or sneak up on you from a cost perspective, or what's the story there?
Yeah, Google Analytics 4 is still 100% free. And with that, I mean, I think you get a lot of bang for your buck. Mark talks about all the visualizations and stuff in Matomo. That's great. Google Analytics is comparable as well, and you don't have to pay for it. There is no 360 option for GA4 yet. Some people suspect that Google will announce a paid version eventually. I think they're pushing people to use their products like Google BigQuery instead. So I'm skeptical that there will be a 360 version of GA4 in the future, but who knows? We'll see.
Good stuff. Glad to hear that it is going to be free. And I think you hinted at a couple of things that depending on your setup, if you want to get into the BigQuery aspect or other data warehouse aspects of the analytics game, then there may be some cost associated with that. But otherwise, just straight up Google Analytics 4 is going to be a free product. So good to have that clarity. Mark, I know we touched on this just briefly. I mentioned that Matomo has different kind of ways you can pay for it. It's an open source program, so there's a free aspect to it. But is that the whole story there? What do you get for free, and what are some things to look out for when it comes to that?
Matomo does have a free version. As you mentioned, it is formerly Piwik, so it is open source, and there is a free component to it. But I think for most businesses, the free installation really isn't that viable. And it's while the software itself is free, there is a cost for you to maintain it on your servers. So it's technically not free. But even I would say, what Will was talking about with GA4, it's nominally free. But if you want more than 14 months of data, you now got to pay, because you got to store it somewhere if you want to use it. So you're probably going to be paying for BigQuery. And it's kind of the same thing with Matomo, although it's a little bit more upfront. Matomo does have a cost, but the cost is calculated based on how many hits, monthly hits a web property gets, and it scales up. So a smaller site, is going to pay on the order of like $40 a month, roughly. For analytics, and then a big enterprise site that's got a couple of million hits per month is going to pay in the several $1,000s, but it's still a lot less than GA360, which and I'm sure, as Will said, they haven't announced it. Google's probably going to announce a 360 version of GA4 or a paid version, we should say. And right now, that starts at $150,000 a year. If you're going to spend that kind of money on the Matomo platform, you're going to have a huge website. You'll be, in the top 1,000 probably web properties in the world. If you're going to be paying that kind of money. So yeah, there's a cost, but I think it's important to note that Matomo, and we haven't really talked about this yet, but Matomo has all of these features that just GA4 or Universal Analytics don't have, and so some of the costs that you're going to spend on Matomo is going to give you some of these added features that you might be using today with some third-party tools like Hotjar, HubSpot, or Crazy Egg, or VWO, or some of these other, sort of add-on analytics platforms that focus on forms or heat maps or things like that. Matomo has all that stuff built in. So part of your monthly fee, you're getting that right. You're getting those features right in your analytics package. So I think there's really, Will mentioned bang for, buck. I think there's really no comparison. Again, with Motomo, you're getting tremendous bang for your buck with the monthly fees that you're paying for that analytics engine. It's different. If you're used to having no cost for your web analytics because you use GA3 for the last however many years, the future is going to have a monthly cost associated with that in most cases.
Great points. I think some of the things to really highlight there are, like you said, it's different. If you're used to Universal Analytics, you're used to the free tier, just be mindful of here's what you're going to get in the future for free. And if you're seeking an alternative, there are free options there as well. I know there are some platforms that we're not even talking about right now that may be worth investigating. Mm-hmm. So definitely do your due diligence, see what you're getting, see what that bang for the buck is going to be. Mm-hmm. It sounds like Matomo has a lot to offer. but you will probably pay something. You may not need to pay a lot, but you will get a lot from it, and you may be able to save costs elsewhere if you're using some tools that have some overlap. So as always, important to do your due diligence and see what you're getting for what you're paying, and make sure that you have a good plan set up to make sure you continue to get what you need. So great points from everybody on that. Another thing that's really important is data privacy. And this is something that has been building steam. I think it's been kind of like a snowball rolling down a hill. It just continues to gain momentum and relevance in today's day and age. I think there's a lot of legislation that has been passed and will be passed in the near future when it comes to protecting people's rights when it comes to online tracking and people's desire to protect their data when they're browsing the web. So your analytics platform needs to be considerate of these things. You know, what is your approach going to be? How are you protecting your website visitors or your app visitors? And just about every analytics platform has something to say about this. Google Analytics 4 certainly included. I want to toss it to Will first. And Will, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about GA4's take on data privacy. How do they let you manage any settings in there? How are they being mindful of people's privacy and all the regulations that are out there right now?
Right. Yeah, very good question. It's still against Google's policy, obviously, to send any personally identifiable information to Google Analytics, any property, Universal Analytics or GA4. That does not mean they prevent you from doing so. There are not any solutions built right in to prevent PII from getting into your property. So you're kind of forced to go use filters or find a solution online to kind of, you know, filter those things. I'd say potential PII is best evaluated and handled on a case-by-case basis, but there are plenty of solutions that can be deployed via GTM or through a developer that can prevent PII from making it to GA4. So just be conscious of that when you're setting up your measurement plan.
I think that's a great point. It's always important to take that responsibility upon yourself. It's the burden is on you to make sure that you're not violating any regulations and that you're, you know, abiding by your customers' wishes. Ultimately, I think is really important. Mark, what is Matomo's stance on protecting people's privacy online?
Yeah, I love this question because I think this is sort of core to Matomo's value prop and sort of how they've been differentiating themselves from Google. And that is they're sort of hanging their hat on data, on privacy, on really how important it is to protect the user's privacy and also to honor their wishes. So foremost, you know, Matomo supports you know, users that have gone into their browser and set up a do not track feature on their browser. If you've done that, or if your browser natively supports that, Matomo's going to honor that. Whereas I don't believe Google does. So, you know, privacy is critical. Matomo's got an opt-out feature for tracking. But the most important thing, I think, is that you have just several levers to pull to configure the Matomo data collection engine in such a way that it can lock down the information that's being captured to ensure that there's no PII or, you know, private information, personally identifiable information. And you can anonymize IP addresses. You can, you know, you have complete control over how you want to configure your data retention policies for raw data as well as for processed reports. And Matomo does adhere to GDPR, which is the European data privacy regulations. It adheres to CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is really pertinent only to California residents, but basically any website in the country or the world for that matter. If you've got a visitor from California, you have to support CCPA. Matomo does support HIPAA, so Google is very clear in stating, "Don't use this for HIPAA. We do not we do not allow you to do that." Matomo can support HIPAA requirements, and there's a UK requirement called PECR, which is their data privacy version of GDPR, and Matomo supports that. So data privacy is kind of at the heart of what Matomo set out to do with with a web analytics engine. So it's very, very robust in what you can set up. You can lock it all the way down, or you can keep it wide open. Whatever your preference is as the website owner. And here's the other thing, and this is sort of related to data privacy, because with Matomo, you own the data. You as the website owner, it's your data. And I don't know that that's the case, with all other analytics engines, because you're sitting on somebody else's servers. But even if you're on the Matomo servers, you absolutely own that data, and you can extract it into an archive that you can go and take somewhere else if you want, or you can delete it or do whatever you want with it. So privacy is really important.
Yeah, I don't think it can be overstated just how important the privacy-minded just take on analytics has to be, especially in this day and age. We have to make sure that we're respecting everybody's privacy, abiding by the regulations. So no matter what platform you choose, make sure that your strategy includes protecting privacy of your users and abiding by any regulations, and being mindful of future regulations that may come to pass, and making sure that you keep that in check. So that's important to cover. Good to hear that both of those have a stance and are capable of fulfilling those needs. It's just a matter of planning and strategy, as with most other things. Well, let's talk about something a little bit different here. I'm going to jump to something when it comes to analysis of your website's data or your app's data, and something that is important to me. I know I've had this happen quite a bit, and I will select my tracking solution, and I want to know that it's working right away. I want to know sometimes on a given day of the week, am I getting traffic right now? Maybe a website change gets pushed live, and I want to make sure that it didn't interfere with tracking. And so what I'm talking about is real-time tracking and monitoring. And I just want to see what each platform's take on that is. Make sure that it's possible. Is it easy to log in and really quickly at a glance make sure everything's working as expected? Well, I'll jump to you first. Is that something that is native to GA4?
Yeah, absolutely. A big part of GA4 when it rolled out was the new real-time reporting. It's definitely upgraded compared to Universal Analytics. One thing I think is really cool about it is that you can see information about active users on the site in terms of events, acquisition source, location, content, device type, audience, etc., all on one screen, which to me is a huge upgrade from Universal, because you don't have to do so much clicking around. You can really see what's happening on the site in real time, right in front of you in one place. So that's a big plus for me.
Yeah, it sounds like they have a big focus on real-time monitoring in GA4, and that's a big change from Universal Analytics. I remember when they started to introduce real-time monitoring in Universal Analytics, and certainly used that plenty of times, and it's glad to hear that's going to continue to be a feature available in GA4, even more robust at that. So good to hear that. And I want to shift over to Mark and get the Matomo capabilities outlined there. Is it possible? Is it easy to use, Mark? Is it everything we hoped for and more, or is it lacking? What's your take on real-time tracking?
Yeah, well, so it seems like, from Will's description, GA4 is finally caught up to Matomo because Matomo got all that. So it's sorry, Will. It's just Matomo has real-time data that within 5 seconds of the visit, that visitor log data shows up. There are some dedicated real-time reports. There's a real-time visitor map. The visits log logs all the real-time data. You can see, the time on site. You can see what browser they're coming from, where they're coming from. Are they a first-time visitor or returning visitor? You see the referring information. So what external source was sending them. You can see the number of actions that they took, if they converted on a goal, what pages did they visit. So that's all baked in. It's all part of Matomo's real-time data reporting, and that appears within 5 seconds. So it's basically instantaneous, and then everything else then shows up within 900 seconds, so 15 minutes after a visitor is on the site. It's now all of that data is populated and throughout all of the reporting interfaces. So you're getting, if you want to see, if you made a change to a site and you want to see how that change is impacted, whether it's through a funnel or through some type of goal completion that you're trying to do, it's going to show up immediately and you'll be able to see that. So it's pretty robust.
Sounds like both platforms really shine when it comes to real-time monitoring and also just the visualization and reporting. And when it comes to real-time, you need to make sure it's working, and you log in and it's right there. So that's always good. Glad to hear that's available on both, and it's a core feature of both. Let's shift to another aspect of tracking and monitoring and reporting. So really quickly, Will, tell me about Google Analytics 4 and how does it handle cross-platform tracking? And when I say cross-platform, I'm talking about you want to track engagement on a website, but also maybe you have a mobile app, and a lot of businesses nowadays, they'll have an app where conversions happen, engagement happens on the app, but also you may have a website where people come to visit, find information, but conversions may happen there too. So it's important to be able to track both respectively, report on both respectively, but sometimes there's need for cross-platform tracking and being able to make sure that's all cohesive and in one place. So what's GA4's take on that?
Yeah, actually GA4 gives you the ability to add multiple data streams, including apps, to one property. So you can see all that data side by side in the same place, which is really cool. I would say too, the setup is actually surprisingly easy. So that's a big plus as well. Configuration can be deployed via GTM or for your app. You just need a simple measurement ID. So definitely a good plus for GA4 there.
Awesome. Yeah, glad to hear that is available. Mark, what is Matomo's stance on this platform tracking and monitoring? How do they handle that?
Yeah, so with Motomo, it's a little bit different. So it's not, I think, as maybe out of the box integrated as Will described for GA4, but there is a solution. It requires using an SDK for iOS and for Android that would involve some technical implementation, perhaps some software development, depending upon what program or what programming language your mobile app was built in. They currently support it for Python, Java, or PHP only. So it's so there are some limitations. So it's not it's not the same sort of integrated out of the box solution, but it's very robust. Once you have wired up that SDK to Matomo and to your mobile app, you are going to get all the things that you would want, like how many active users and how much time do they spend using the app. You get custom event tracking. You get device level information, so you're going to know exactly what kind of device and what version of the OS, and a lot of other really important statistics that you want to know for your mobile app tracking. So, and then that would show up in a web measurable or web property in the Matomo interface. So it's certainly possible to use it. It requires a little bit of extra effort to get that tracking.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds good. Sounds like it's definitely possible. Would require a well thought out plan.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's safe to say either way you go, if you use GA4 and or Matomo, you're going to want to have a well thought out plan and consult with developers if you're implementing on an application and or a web property. So there's a lot to think about there. There's a lot of strategizing to do. So definitely be careful if you're diving into that. That's important to have a good plan on. So good information. Let's jump over to, let's talk about data sampling. And we got a little bit nerdy earlier talking about this, that, and the other, but data sampling is one of those things that I think people at a glance, or when you first hear it, they'll think, wow, that's above my pay grade, or I don't need to know about all that. But it actually affects a lot of the things that we do when it comes to analytics. And if you're in a marketing role in any capacity, you need to be aware of what data sampling is, where it happens, how often it happens, and how it impacts your numbers, so that when you do make decisions, data-driven decisions, you are making decisions that are based on accurate numbers, as accurate as possible. So data sampling, really important. In Google Analytics, a lot of times they will use data sampling to really make their reporting a little bit quicker in the platform. It will sample some of the data. It'll say, okay, well, I'm going to take, let's say, 50% of the data that's available and project some numbers based off of that. And they have a lot of sophisticated algorithms to do that in Google Analytics, and usually do a pretty good job. But sometimes you may not have the whole picture. Sometimes you may want to know the nitty gritty, all the very detailed numbers there, everything that's available. So what is the take on data sampling in GA4? Because I know we've had to deal with that. The three of us have had to deal with that in Universal Analytics. Does it go away in GA4? Is it handled differently? Is there something to look out for, or anything that people should know about data sampling? Will, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, like you said, we've dealt with data sampling a lot in the past, and it can be pretty frustrating. If you're coming from a 360 property to GA4, unfortunately, GA4 doesn't guarantee that you get unsampled data. However, it does give you an indicator at the top of every page, which signals the sample rate of the report that you're looking at. What I found, though, is that because of GA4's limited data retention, is that it's actually pretty rare to hit that data sampling threshold. So, you may see it every now and then, but you do get the indicator up at the top of what you're looking at that lets you know if you're getting sampled data or not.
Cool, good to know, and good point about keeping on the lookout. If you're about to make a big decision based on some data and you see that data is being sampled, you may want to seek a different way to verify those numbers, just to make sure that you're getting everything that you can to make a sound decision. Mark, what about Matomo's take on data sampling? Is it there? How do they handle it? Is it efficient? give us some insight there.
Matomo doesn't sample data. It just doesn't do it. You get 100% of your data all the time. There's no sampling. So
Okay, well,
you don't have to worry
short and
about
sweet, yeah. Well, that makes it easy on that end. You don't have to look for it or be worried about it per se.
Yeah.
I know that personally speaking, data sampling, it can be helpful in a way. It can also definitely be hindering in a way. So no matter what you do, just make sure that you are mindful that you know it exists. It is a thing. It's not always a bad thing, but it is a thing. Sometimes it can cause confusion or what have you. So just be mindful of that. Let's talk about another useful tool in analytics and analysis and reporting solutions. Let's talk about funnel reporting. One of the things that I know a lot of people love to look at when it comes to conversion analysis is how did people go through the process of converting and where are we losing people in this process? So, Will, how does GA4 handle that from a tracking and reporting process and visualization or being able to determine weak points?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Explorer tool earlier. Again, it's a really powerful tool. And one of the things that it offers is the funnel analysis tool. It gives you a lot of flexibility in how you break down your funnel. You can split it up by different segments and dimensions and things like that, just like everything else in the Explorer tool. And another cool thing about GA4 is that you can mark events as conversions within the platform. So if you have an event that you'd like to see the funnel for that event, you can mark it as a conversion and then use that in the funnel analysis tool.
It sounds like somewhat of an upgrade from Universal Analytics. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. I would say so. I would say it's easier to use, and again, it gives you a lot more flexibility and customization than previously in Universal Analytics.
Fantastic. That sounds like a win to me. Mark, how about Matomo? What is the funnel analysis and conversion analysis process there?
Yeah, so Matomo's got some very advanced funnel analysis tools that I think allow you a lot of flexibility in how you want to analyze your data, how you want to track, conversion success at various steps. You can name and set an unlimited number of steps using either a URL parameters, or URL path that matches, any number of patterns. And then you can basically say that step is required or it's optional, and go through. The nice thing is, as you're setting up these funnels, there's a validator tool that basically tells you, yeah, your logic for this step works, or it doesn't, it doesn't make sense. So as you're setting your funnel up, you get immediate feedback to basically tell you whether or not your funnel makes sense, or you got to rethink it. And then in terms of, analyzing the funnel once you've created it, it is something that is about as easy to interpret as possible. Each step has a little bar chart that is broken down into green and red parts, and the green are the people who proceeded to the next step, and the red are the people who exited the funnel at that step. You get a view of the number of visitors that went to each step, plus where they came from to get to that step. And you can see, not only can you see that data for whatever period you're looking at, you can view that evolving over time. But what's really cool about it is at each step along the way, if you want to see the cohort of people who either dropped off or proceeded, you can basically take that number and you just click on a little button, and it gives you a full visitor log of all those people who were at that particular step, so that you can do some detailed analysis on that cohort, and and create a custom segment if you want right from there based on so if you have a shopping cart and you want to see, okay, people get, let's say it's 5 steps and people get to the 3rd step and there's a big drop off, you can analyze that cohort of people who dropped off at that step to try and understand more about what may have caused that behavior. So the funnel analysis is extremely powerful in Matomo.
Sounds pretty robust to me, and it sounds like both of them are honestly a pretty big upgrade from universal analytics. So it's glad to hear that there's a good option no matter which direction you go. So fantastic. I do want to talk about some conversion tracking a little bit more and being able to report on success. One example, just from personal experience, we run a lot of SEO campaigns, and it's important for us to be able to use our analytics tools to prove how successful our campaigns are. And I know that definitely goes for paid media campaigns as well, and pretty much any source or medium of traffic that you're putting forth an effort to bring in traffic from and have conversions from that. You want to be able to see how well it performs. And so your analytics platform has to be able to easily do that. Will, is it easy to do that in GA4? What are some ways to do that in GA4? Or have you had any pain points there? Talk us through that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah. If you do SEO, you're probably pretty familiar with Google Search Console. The cool thing about GA4 is you can connect Google Search Console to it directly. When you do that, it gives you an expanded look into organic search traffic, as well as organic search queries. So it does take a little bit of setup, but once you have that setup done, all that information from GESC just gets pulled into one place and combined with all your GA4 data.
Well, I know Google is usually pretty good about talking to Google when they have their own products linking together. It can be pretty powerful. So good to hear that's available there. Mark, how about Matomo? If somebody from the SEO world is concerned about the potency, the ability to be able to report on campaign performance or anything like that, is Matomo a good fit?
Yeah, so you can do the same, but you can actually do more. So this is why I love Matomo. So not only can you pull in all those search parameters and this, the queries and impressions and clicks and all that sort of stuff from Search Console, from Google Search Console, but Matomo lets you integrate with Bing and Yandex as well. So you get a complete picture of your organic keywords and your organic performance, not just the Google-centric view. Now, obviously, Google is the biggest search engine by far, but for a lot of people, Bing is very important, and in some websites, Bing is actually a fairly significant percentage of search traffic. So having that integration with all 3 of the big organic search platforms, I think is a big differentiator. So yeah.
Good stuff. Good details on both. I think both can offer a powerful tool for people that need to plug into Google Search Console and beyond. So that's fantastic insight. Appreciate that. Let's dive a little deep here and let's talk about something that has been useful for me. I think all 3 of us have tapped into this a little bit at some point or another. Something that was available in Universal Analytics when we would set up tracking in Google Tag Manager, for example, we'd be able to use something called a custom task to do custom operations, send really specific data, or in some cases strip out very specific data. And it's a very technical way to customize the data that's going into Google Analytics. For example, you can use custom task to remove hits that contain PII before they are even sent to Universal Analytics and before they are even sent to Google servers. So you're not in violation of Google's policies there. You can set a client ID as a custom dimension. You can do a lot of different things all wrapped up in one. It's very powerful. Is there a continuity there? Does that work in GA4 well, or do you have to find other means to accomplish some of those same tasks, if you will?
Well, yeah, unfortunately, custom task does not work with GA4. Like you mentioned, it's great for removing PII, and we talked about some of the solutions earlier, or we talked about PII in relation to GA4 earlier. So the omission of custom tasks is definitely unfortunate. I'm hopeful that Google will come up with a similar solution for GA4 soon. But in the meantime, there are comparable, probably more complicated solutions to achieve the same goals that custom tasks did. It just may, require some additional help or some, extensive Googling or something like that. You may need help from a developer or someone, pretty experienced in GTM.
Good points. And I know you made a good point there about GA4 adding in a feature, and they've been really good about staying on top of development and adding features. So it's definitely possible that things could change anytime. So it's always important to stay on top of the analytics news there. So great point. That may come around at some point or another. Who knows? Mark, I do want to see if there is anything equivalent in Matomo, or are people high and dry when it comes to those features?
Yeah, well, so the good news is that a lot of the functions that I think many people are using custom tasks in a GTM variable for have been built into the Matomo platform. So like the PII example you were talking about, Matomo's got that baked in. So you don't need to rely on a custom task to handle that. It's going to be on a case-by-case basis to see how Matomo would handle, some custom tasks that might be in your GTM container. So I'm not 100% sure, honestly, how some of those might flow through to Matomo or not. So it's just we would just have to take it on a case-by-case basis to see what was set up as a custom task, what was it trying to accomplish, and is that something that's either natively supported or that Matomo would be able to support. So don't have a better answer than that, unfortunately.
Makes sense though. And going on a case-by-case basis is, I think, what a lot of people are going to have to do when they're looking for a universal analytics alternative. So, if you have a lot of custom stuff going on, then you have to evaluate what each platform that you're investigating offers and how you're going to approach being able to continue tracking very specific things, or blocking certain things, or whatever you need to do. And that's true of Google Analytics 4 as well. Don't you think, Will, just going on a case-by-case basis in those very custom scenarios?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's just kind of a part of this part of the industry, is that, every business is going to have different needs, and they're going to require different solutions. So taking things, one step at a time, thinking ahead, and building the solution that's best for your goals is what's most important.
Yep, makes perfect sense to me. We're about to wrap up here. I do have one final question for both of you. I think we'll go to Will first. And the question is, what do you think the biggest advantage of GA4 is for your average user or power user, however you want to phrase that? What do you think the biggest advantage is?
Oh, it's hard to choose one. We've talked about how GA4 is going to be a transition. There's going to be a learning curve. No matter what analytics tool you were using before, getting to GA4 is definitely going to take a minute to get used to. But the way it allows you to pull in multiple data streams, including your mobile app, into one property and see all those events side by side, It's really helpful. And you can't beat the fact that it works seamlessly like with other Google products like Google Ads, BigQuery, and we talked about Data Studio earlier. But I think my favorite thing about it is what it's built off of, which is what we talked about at the top of the conversation. The new data structure just makes for very flexible, highly customizable measurement plans. So, you know, if you think ahead and you really put a plan forward for your KPIs and the things you want to track, you can see, you know, you can configure things exactly how you want to see them.
Good stuff. Yeah, great. All great points. Mark, I'm going to throw it over to you for your favorite thing about Matomo. What is the big selling point there?
Yeah, so there's so many fantastic advantages for Matomo, I think. And I think that this conversation has really highlighted them. Like, you know, so first, no data sampling. I mean, if that's important to you, which for more in-depth analysis, data sampling is going to come into play. Matomo, you get no issues there. Privacy, I think it's a huge win for Motomo. It's just so much more robust and flexible in what you can do. But I think probably the biggest advantage right now is that if you want a simple, intuitive interface that you're familiar with using because you've been a GA Universal Analytics user for many years, Motomo is going to be a transition that's just easy as pie. It's just you're going to recognize the way it's set up. You're just going to get a lot out of it with almost no effort. So I think, you know, that's a huge advantage, and that doesn't even begin to mention all of the additional features that Motomo offers that you know, that Google Analytics doesn't offer. And if you care about your historical data, Matomo's the way to do it, because it's super easy. So biggest advantage is seamless, easy, and just continuity of your experience in doing analytics.
A lot of great points there. Appreciate that. I do want to flip the script a little bit and just have a little fun here, because I know we're all really experts on a lot of these platforms, and y'all have taken a side here throughout this conversation. Will has been advocating for GA4 and Mark has been advocating for Motomo, but I want to flip it a little bit at the end here. And the question I'm going to ask both of you is going to be, if you had to pick one thing, just one thing, your favorite thing from the other platform that you have not been advocating for. So Mark, you're going to pick out your favorite thing from GA4. Will, you're going to pick out your favorite thing from Motomo. And we're going to see what you have to say about the other side. So Mark, I'm going to go to you first. You're going to talk about, if you just could choose one thing that you absolutely love about what Google's doing with GA4, what is it? And tell us a little bit about it, why you like it.
Okay. What if there isn't one? No, I'm kidding. I think probably I think there's actually two things there that are equally of real, I think, significant note for it. And the first is, and Will was mentioning it, you know, obviously in the beginning of this session, which is the simplification of their measurement model and the flexibility of the event tracking and, you know, event parameters. It definitely gives Google a lot more power in analyzing things that are happening on your website. So that's probably the biggest. And then related to that is probably the improvement of their funnel analysis. I think that's those two things to me are definitely positives for GA4 that are pretty cool. So.
That's huge. Yeah, agreed. Well, I'm going to toss it to you for a little bit of Motomo praise, or what is your favorite thing about Motomo that's your takeaway there?
Yeah. I've been defending GA4 best I can this whole time. But I can't lie, I like both platforms a lot. If it was up to me, I'd have them both running on my site at the same time. So, I think there's a lot to love about Matomo with the segmentation is really good. The no data sampling is huge. And then the universal analytics data import is such a big factor for people who are making that transition. But I think for me, the big value add, the so-called cherry on top of the Matomo sundae is the heat map feature, because that's just something that it seems to me that nobody else is offering outside of just a third-party platform. Having that heat map built directly in can just be so useful for so many different use cases. So that's going to be my number one thing for Matomo.
Again, great points. And yeah, you pointed out something there I want to hit on, and that's, we have been jabbing at each other a little bit throughout this. It's fun to take sides and see what the pros and cons are, but we actually do advocate for both of these platforms. We have a lot to like about both of these. There's a lot to like about both of these platforms. We advocate for having both set up and running if at all possible. And we have done a lot of that here lately and worked with a lot of people to make sure that they are able to get the benefits of both of these platforms and make good data-driven decisions for their marketing and beyond. There's a lot to pull from Motomo, obviously. We do like a lot of the features there, but it takes careful planning. It takes a lot of strategy. So definitely we recommend, no matter what you do, get with a strategist, get with somebody that knows what they're doing. If you like what we have to offer, definitely get in touch with us. We'd love to talk to you about how we can help you set up an implementation of one or both of these platforms that suit your needs and make sure you get all the data you need, especially with universal analytics going the way of the dodo next year. We want to make sure that you have your bases covered, and it's totally possible in this case. So we'll wrap up there. I appreciate both of y'all hopping on and talking through a lot of the features available on both of these platforms, how they cover a lot of sometimes controversial topics, and making sure that people are protected in their privacy rights and that they have all the bases covered. I think they're both very strong platforms. We appreciate everybody that's watched this. If you have any suggestions on things that we can talk about in the future, we'd love to get your recommendations, and we can definitely do a deep dive on just about whatever. So appreciate you. We'll catch you in the future. Hope to do this again sometime. Thank you. We'll talk to you later.